Okay, the news are in, guys. You ain't gonna believe it, but they want 135 months. So I'm gonna tell you exactly why the government wants Sean Combs behind bars for 135 months, and what it means if he doesn't get that sentence. So after a wild 7-week trial, the jury came back with a verdict that, frankly, almost nobody saw coming. On July 2, 2025, they found Combs guilty on 2 counts, 3 and 5, for transporting people for prostitution. In simple terms, the jury decided he was responsible for moving individuals, like his former girlfriend Cassie Ventura and another woman identified only as Jane, across state lines for paid sexual encounters. But here's the kicker. The jury acquitted him of the heaviest charges, the RICO conspiracy and sex trafficking counts. The ones that could have put him away for life didn't stick. So while he dodged a life sentence, the government is far from finished. They're now pushing for a sentence of over 11 years, and their reasons paint a picture that's a whole lot darker than just a simple transportation charge. To really get why the government is throwing the book at him, you have to look at the timeline. This whole thing didn't just happen overnight. The feds officially started digging into Combs' world on November 17, 2023. For months, they were quietly building their case. But here's the crazy part. The government claims that even with all that heat, Combs didn't stop. He was arrested on September 16, 2024, but the activities that got him convicted continued well into that year. After a marathon 7-week trial that started in May 2025, he was finally convicted on July 2nd. So why does this matter? Because prosecutors are using this timeline to paint a picture of a man who feels he's above the law. They're telling the judge, this guy knew we were watching him, and he just kept going. That's a powerful argument for a long sentence. But this isn't just about legal paperwork and court dates. The government brought out the human side of this story, and oh boy is it grim. At the heart of their argument are 2 women, Cassie Ventura and another identified only as Jane. Ventura wrote to the judge describing a decade of abuse that left her with permanent scars and nightmares. She says the whole situation pushed her to the edge, where she almost ended things. To cope with the so-called freak-offs, she got hooked on the drugs Combs supplied, leading to a serious opioid addiction she had to seek treatment for. And she wasn't alone. Jane told the court she felt completely violated and sent Combs texts saying she wanted to die. This is the human damage the prosecution is putting front and center, arguing that this case is about breaking people, not just laws. So how did one man keep this going for so long? Well, it seems he had a pretty damn sick playbook. The main events were called freak-offs or hotel nights. These weren't just parties. They were multi-day marathons where women like Cassie and Jane were set up with male escorts, and Combs allegedly directed the whole show, often filming it. To fuel these encounters, he supplied a cocktail of drugs, which the women said they needed just to get through the degrading experience. And then there was the money. He paid for their apartments, cars, and lifestyle. But that money had strings. The moment Jane resisted a hotel night, he'd threatened to pull her rent, basically saying, look at the roof over your head. He even had his staff, assistants, security, you name it, arranging travel for the escorts and delivering cash. This wasn't a relationship. It was an operation.
All right, so this is the main event. Why does the government want to lock Diddy up for 135 months? That's over 11 years, and they've laid out a brutal case for it. First up, violence and coercion. This is their biggest hammer. They're saying these weren't just consensual arrangements. They argue he used brute force and fear to get what he wanted. The prosecution's sentencing memo is filled with details of physical abuse that they claim was a constant threat. It was his way or the highway, and the highway looked pretty damn painful. They point to the constant threats of releasing his secretly recorded videos as a form of blackmail to keep the women in line. Then there's the abuse of power. He wasn't just a boyfriend. He was their boss, their landlord, their entire world. The government argues he used his money and fame as weapons. He controlled their careers, paid their rent, and then dangled it all over their heads. Next, the government calls him a leader or organizer. They're saying he was the mastermind of a criminal crew, directing employees and even the victims themselves to arrange the travel, buy the drugs, and pay the escorts. He wasn't just a participant. He was the kingpin of his own twisted operation. And get this, obstruction of justice. The prosecutors claim he tried to trick the court by having his lawyers present a doctored legal pad to make it look like his notes were privileged. That's a move so bold, it's almost impressive if it wasn't so illegal. They also argue he preyed on vulnerable victims, targeting a young and naive Cassie and exploiting Jane's past trauma. Finally, it's about sending a message. The government says he kept going even after the feds raided his homes. They're basically telling the judge, if you don't stop him, who will? Of course, while the government is demanding a decade-plus sentence, Combs's lawyers are singing a very different tune. They're asking the judge for a slap on the wrist, no more than 14 months, which basically means time served. Their argument is that the jury cleared him of the big stuff, so the punishment should be minimal. They're trying to sell the idea that he's a changed man, claiming he's finally dealing with his issues in rehab. On top of that, they're painting a sob story about his time in jail, saying the conditions at the Metropolitan Detention Center are so damn awful that it's like he's been serving a much harsher sentence already. They're talking about everything from bad food to lockdowns, trying to get the judge to feel sorry for him. But the government is calling total on all of it. First, the rehab claim. They point out that Combs released that video in May 2024, promising to be a better man, and then barely a month later, he viciously attacked Jane. So much for changing his ways. As for the terrible jail conditions, prosecutors were quick to remind the court that before he was convicted, Combs's own lawyers were publicly praising the jail staff for being very accommodating. It seems the jail was a hellhole after the guilty verdict came in. The government sees these arguments as a desperate attempt to downplay years of abuse, and they are not having it.
So what happens if the judge actually buys what the defense is selling and gives Combs a light sentence, like the 14 months he's asking for? Well, it wouldn't be the end of the story. It would be the start of a whole new firestorm. First, the government would almost certainly appeal the sentence immediately. Prosecutors have spent years building this case and have made it crystal clear they see Combs as a dangerous predator. A slap on the wrist would be a huge loss for them, and they would fight it tooth and nail, arguing the sentence is unreasonably lenient and fails to account for all the evidence of abuse they presented. Then you've got the public reaction. The headlines would write themselves. Diddy walks free. Justice for sale. Social media would absolutely melt down. For a lot of people, this case has become a major test of whether the justice system treats rich and famous celebrities differently. A light sentence would confirm their worst fears, and you can bet there would be protests and a massive public outcry. But the most devastating impact would be on the victims. Imagine Cassie Ventura, Jane, and the other women who came forward reliving their trauma on the stand only to see him walk away after a few months. It would send a chilling message that their pain doesn't matter, that if your abuser is powerful enough, he can get away with anything. The government has already pointed this out, arguing that a light sentence would create a massive sentencing disparity compared to regular people who get years for similar crimes. It would be a legal and public relations nightmare. Now let's flip the script. What if the judge throws the book at him and gives the government everything it wants? A 135-month sentence is no joke. That's more than 11 years in a federal prison. For a guy who's lived a life of ultimate luxury and control, this would be a complete and total shattering of his world. But it's not just about the time. The government is also pushing for a massive fine of up to $500,000. While that might sound like pocket change for a billionaire, it's another layer of punishment designed to hit him where it hurts. The real impact, though, would be the message it sends. A sentence that long would be a massive statement from the court that no one, no matter how rich or famous, is above the law. It would be a huge win for prosecutors in the Me Too era, proving that powerful figures can be held accountable for their actions.
Legally, you can bet Combs's all-star legal team would file an appeal before the ink on the sentence is even dry. They'd argue that the judge improperly used details from the charges he was acquitted of to justify such a long sentence, which is a major legal battleground in this case. That appeal process would drag on for years. But for the victims, a sentence of that length would be a profound form of validation. It would mean that their stories were heard, their pain was recognized, and the man who they say terrorized them is finally facing serious consequences.
But even when the judge bangs that gavel on October 3rd, don't think for a second this is over. No matter what sentence he gets, this case is heading straight to the Court of Appeals. If it's a long sentence, his high-priced lawyers will scream that the judge got it wrong, probably arguing he was punished for crimes he was acquitted of. If it's short, you can bet the government will appeal, calling it a slap on the wrist. This legal tug-of-war could go on for years, and the case could even get sent back down for a do-over on the sentencing. And here's a key detail. He gets credit for every single day he's been locked up since his arrest in September 2024. So while everyone waits for the final number, the clock on his actual time served has already been ticking. It's far from a done deal. So the stage is set for a legal showdown that could define a generation of celebrity justice. Will the judge side with the government, agree that Combs is an unrepentant predator and lock him up for over a decade, or will they hand down a lighter sentence that sparks outrage and makes his accusers feel like their voices were ignored? The verdict might be in, but the real judgment is about to be handed down, and it will define his legacy forever. What do you think is a fair sentence for Sean Combs? Tell me what you think.